Good afternoon. This is Brother Ed Steed, your host of Kicking It with Brother Ed. Man, we got a special program on for you guys today. Welcome to each and every one of you. We got a panel of experts and professionals that are they're really going to address the issues. We have a very important issue we're addressing today on this 59th anniversary of the March on Washington, led by one of our country's greatest advocates of nonviolence. And it seems strange that violence has plagued the nation so much, but we're going into the issue of gun violence today with great detail. So I have, as I said, some great panelists for you today. We're going to bring them on very, very shortly. One thing I wanted to express to you up front is that we have a chat box. I see a couple of people already accessing the chat box. That's wonderful. We want you to ask all your questions throughout. We will get to the questions during the program, but just please type into the chat box whatever your questions and or your comments might be. We would like you to like and subscribe to our program here. We're only on twice a month. We're not going to inundate you with a whole bunch of emails and such, but twice a month, we would love for you to partake. We promise again not to inundate you, but we will be bringing you some special programs that will be of a personal and community interest at times to you. So without further ado, I want to bring the guests on. My first guest is going to be a young man. I'm gonna pull them all up on the screen so you can see they're ready and prepared and lovely faces, handsome faces in the case of the gentleman. Uh, this is our panel, man. We have what an array of folks here, and I want to introduce you to some of them. I'm going to start off with the prosecutor of Cumberland County, Jennifer Webb McCrae. She's an awesome person. She's been the prosecutor of Cumberland County since 2010, man. 2010. So if my math serves me, prosecutor, that's like 12 years, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, 12 years, man. And she was nominated originally by Governor John Corzine, but served under his administration and the Christie administration, and currently is still serving, the first female, the first African American to ever serve in that position. And she's shepherded over $3.5 million towards programs to combat gun violence, drug addiction, and other things. But that's enough for me. I want to bring her up so you can hear from her. Prosecutor, would you like to say anything?
I just want to say I am really happy to be here today. I feel very honored to be amongst this esteemed panel. I have been prosecutor for 12 years. I started my career as a young attorney at the public defender's office, and then went into private practice where I still did criminal defense work of years of practice. I still have been was a criminal defense attorney longer than I've been. I became prosecutor in 2010. I wanted to put my stamp on what justice looks like in my community. And while I do recognize that the most important part of my job is to hold individuals accountable for the crimes that they commit, I feel as though my faith makes me have a moral obligation to also work on ways that we can help individuals live their best healthy lives. And some of that work happens at the front end of the system, and it requires us to break down silos and work across disciplines and work on topics like mental health, like drug addiction, like eradicating the school to prison pipeline, like working on trauma so young people grow up to be fully contributing adults to society. And that's where my passion lies. So I am super excited to be here and super excited to talk about this topic.
Wonderful. Let me ask you a question. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question. From your perspective, that's quite an impressive resume you have and quite a background you bring to the table here. From your perspective, has violence, gun violence in the U.S. of A. Remained the same? Has it gotten worse, better? What's your take on that?
I think that we've seen an uptick post COVID, and that may have been because, during COVID, while individuals were sheltering in place, we did see a downturn in crime and violent crime during that time as well. But I think that gun violence is a pervasive issue in the United States. And part of that comes from, our constitutional right to bear arms, respecting that, but also some of the lobbying that goes on that kind of disrupts what would be my desire to have
Right.
sensible gun laws. So I think if you look at developing countries, gun violence is more pervasive in America than most other developing countries. And I think that is tied to some of, the lobbying issues that don't only affect gun rights, it affects prescription drugs, uh, reducing the cost of healthcare,
Right.
all of those other things.
Wow. Yeah, it's a great country, right? But with that greatness comes some responsibility and some parameters that we have not been overly successful in implementing.
I tell my
So
students that I teach at the college level that
mhm,
freedom isn't free. And that means that we
true that.
always have to work on
Mhm.
perfecting what, our founders called a perfect union.
Well said. We appreciate that. And we're going to come back to you in a little bit. I want to go on to Jeffrey Matthews, who's the special agent in charge of the Northfield Division of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Glad to have him here. He's worked with all kinds of federal and local law enforcement agencies in protecting us. I want to hear from him because, sometimes when we're asleep, and me as a retired federal investigator, also, I notice sometimes when we're asleep, it's people like Zach Matthews, Special Agent in Charge Matthews, and his colleagues that permit us to sleep soundly while they're not. So I want to bring up Zach Matthews to speak about some of the things, some of your concerns with regard to this issue, and maybe enlighten us some. Zach Matthews.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me. Unfortunately, I had some computer issues, so I'm on my phone. So I hope no
Sound
texts
good.
pop up while I'm on there. As Mr. Steve said, my name is Jeff Matthews. I'm a special agent in charge of the Newark Field Division for ATF. Prior to this position, I was the chief of our agency's Force Review Office. So with that job for several years, whenever we had a hostile shooting anywhere in the country, I would go out and manage it for the Bureau. From there, previous to that job, I was the deputy chief of our Special Operations Division. I was over our special response programs, several other national programs as well. I was an assistant special agent in charge for Baltimore. And there is a lot of gun violence in Baltimore City. I was there for several years, and I was a first line supervisor of a violent crime group in Prince George's County. For a couple of years. And prior to that, I was a field agent in East St. Louis, Illinois for about 8 years. Throughout my time, I've kind of specialized in armed drug trafficking groups, organized criminal groups and gangs, and the worst of the worst, the violent offenders. So, again, thank you very much for having me. And I will say, I will agree with Prosecutor Webb. I do feel like it is definitely on an uptick now. I think in 2020, gun injuries have become the number one cause of death in juveniles, and that's telling. And I don't think in any other industrialized nation that's the case. I don't even think the child deaths as a result of gun injuries even hits the top four. And I believe also, I think it's in 2020, more Americans died from gun violence than any other cause. So it's not just limited to juveniles. So there's something that's going on here that needs a closer examination to find out why those rates are so high. But that's what I have to add to that. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, Zach, let me ask you this. You said something has to be done. Are you familiar with anything you're at liberty to share with us regarding that? That's something being done?
Well, there's a couple things. I've got the list of questions you sent to us. So some of those I'll address a little bit later. But yeah, so there's several things. And as most recently as the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that came out. That's definitely a step in the right direction. We now have a Senate confirmed director of ATF. I think that'll give us a voice that we've needed for a long time. ATF, we're probably one of the smallest federal agencies out there. We're tasked with regulating a highly personalized and legal commodity. Very passionate issues go along with gun ownership and the Second Amendment, which, for the record, I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment. I believe in responsible gun ownership. And I also believe, as the law enforcement side of me coming out, aggressive prosecution of those that violate our gun laws, because those are the ones that are causing the death and the carnage in our streets. And without removing them from society, it will continue to occur.
Very good. I appreciate that, sir. Very, very much. And we're going to get back to you, of course, but I want to move on to Karen Cantor, who represents the Brady Group, and I want her to talk about that on her own. I was at a presentation that she facilitated for the NAACP, of which I'm a member, and it was phenomenal. And I know she has some startling things to share. Certainly, they startled me. She's involved in the League of Women Voters. She was in education for over 40 years and still, as I understand, Karen, doing something on the educational front in your private pursuits, correct?
Well, I'm trying to educate people about gun violence and about our civic responsibilities, as the prosecutor was talking about. We need to educate our young people about voting and about, you're talking about gun violence. Gun violence has only become an issue in terms of politics over the past few years. I started with Brady after I retired, around 7 years ago. And
can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Could you just tell us a little bit about Brady? Because I think people need to know. Yes, go ahead.
So Brady was, I don't know if people remember, of course, we remember President Reagan. He was shot. But he survived with no problems. His press secretary, Jim Brady, was also shot, and he ended up being in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And he and his wife, Sarah, decided they wanted to do something about guns. So they started Brady, and they are the people who are responsible for the Brady background check, which is the background check that people must pass. It's a federal law that people must pass in order to be able to get a license to own a gun. And they are a very important organization. You can click on to bradyunited.org. We try to work through 3 avenues. One is through the courts. We have a very important legal team that's really fighting for people. We also work through the legislature in New Jersey, which is where I am. We've gotten, since Governor Murphy has been governor, we've gotten 16 bills passed. So that's really been an accomplishment. And we're also trying to educate people. So things like, I hope people will, and I'm just going to put in a plug here. I want people to know about the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which was a bill passed, a couple of years ago, which allows people, if you are concerned about somebody who has a gun and you're concerned that somebody may do harm to themselves or others, you can either go through the courts yourself, or you can contact a law enforcement officer and have those guns removed until the crisis is over. So that's a really important thing to know about, action that people can take in order to protect themselves and others. The other thing that I really feel is important to know is about safe storage. So many people have bought a gun. There are people, it's been a 300% increase in gun purchases over the past year, which is unbelievable, right? 300%. A lot of these people, I don't know, they got it during the pandemic for whatever reasons. Maybe they were afraid that they would, people would try to come after them for their toilet paper or whatever it is when people were hoarding and stuff. But people were afraid and they've gotten guns. Now, what's important to know, though, is that people have to store their guns safely, not in the closet, because that's kids they're very curious and they know where to go, or in the, under your pants in the drawer. You must put it in unloaded in a gun safe and have the ammunition in a separate place. So those are just things that we really want people to know in order to avoid the accidental deaths, deaths by suicide, which are the far majority of gun deaths, unfortunately. And let me just say, because we've been talking about the numbers of increases in gun violence. So let me just quickly do this. In 2020, there were 45,222 incidents of gun violence. This was the most on record. It is a 14% increase from 2019. It's a 25% increase from 2015, and it's a 43% increase from 2010. Those are big numbers. And as was said before, it's now the leading cause of death for children. So bad.
Wow.
So,
let me ask you something, if I may,
yeah.
Karen. Two questions. First one being, there's an insurance issue, and I know we shouldn't be focused on economics, but I think when it comes to personal expenditures, there's an insurance issue behind this whole gun ownership thing. Do you happen to know what that is, or maybe Zach Matthews can help us out if we need?
Well, what I do know is that people do want that people should have insurance, but I believe currently there is no requirement that people must have insurance. And that would be a very important addendum to our gun laws. And also just to emphasize one thing is that the more guns there are, the more gun deaths there are going to be. That's just the reality. And as people have pointed out, in other countries, there's not this crazy pandemic of gun violence. So,
Excellent. Yeah. Second question is, could you give us the name of that bill again, the protection bill?
The ERPO, the Extreme Risk Protection Order.
Yes.
Yes, extreme. It's some places it's called red flag, and here we call ERPO or Extreme Risk Protection Order. And you can contact your local police department, and everybody has been trained. Everybody in the police department, when this bill was passed, the Attorney General, I don't know if people remember Gerber Grewal, who was great, he made sure that everybody in New Jersey, all the police departments were trained in how to respond if somebody calls up and with this kind of situation.
So they can't like blow you off as we sometimes.
Will not. They cannot.
Right.
They cannot.
That's very important. Thank you for that. Zach Matthews, did you want to chime in on that insurance issue, or you think we covered it?
I think you guys covered it. That sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much. My next guest is Giles Shipp. He's been in law enforcement for a number of years. He served as the director of the Plainfield Police Department. He's worked in SWAT. He's worked in Edison PD as a patrol officer, and also SWAT there. And currently he serves as the police commissioner for the Police Training Commission. And your officers in the state of New Jersey have to go through that Police Training Commission in order to get certified. So, and he's also the president, my president. I have two presidents actually on this panel. We'll meet the other one later. My president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, New Jersey chapter. That's our plug, but president. And we're very proud that he served us for a number of years as well. So, Mr. President, Commissioner Giles Shipp, if you would chime in, we would love to hear from you right now.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. You have a very distinguished panel here, and I know it's going to be a great conversation. One of the things I wanted to start out with is, people don't realize, but we have more guns in America than we have people. All right, over 400,000 million guns in America. As a result of that, we have mass shootings, we have homicides, we have police shootings, we have domestic violence incidents that result in death because of shootings, we have accidental shootings, we have and suicides, and we lose approximately over 40,000 people a year at the butt of a gun. So unfortunately, we also have another array of problems we have to deal with. We have mental illness in this country that often goes undiagnosed, and then when it's diagnosed, it's not treated as though it is this problem that it is. We have white supremacist groups who are also in the gun markets and also perpetuate the proliferation of handguns in underserved communities. And also we have it's now like celebritizing gun violence. Just to give you a quick example, one of the songs I was just happened to hear on the radio the other day, it says, I think it was Biggie, one of Biggie's songs, and it's like, the bumble with the bee, put the heck on the whole family. If it's murder, you know she wrote it. German Ruger for your A, B, deep throated. If we celebritize this, and this continually is heard in underserved communities, what do you think is going to happen? But we allow that to be perpetuated in certain communities. So when you have over the last 50 years, I would say you're seeing this proliferation of handguns and gun violence, and especially underserved communities. And it's going to happen because when you have a community that has been stripped of the jobs, and have not, and is pretty much in despair, people are going to go to a handgun. And also when you have no jobs in the community, now you're going to create an underground economy for illicit activities. And when you're dealing with, and this just didn't happen. If you go back to the 30s, when they came up with the Volstead Act to prevent the alcohol, the bootleggers, gun violence went through the roof. You had organized crime controlling it, various different organized crime groups from various different ethnicities. They had it, and the violence went up. Now, if you look again, go back 50 years, when the drug came into those communities that used to have a lot of manufacturing, then you've seen again another proliferation of the use of handguns, and resulted in, obviously, in death. So we really have to look at a lot of aspects of this. This is not talking about, okay, you got to change people thinking, number one, but also you have to improve people's conditions, because desperate people are going to take desperate measures. And matter of fact, another thing that's going on now, they're trying to ban menthol cigarettes. All right. When you ban menthol cigarettes, people are not addicted to the menthol. They're addicted to the nicotine. So in communities across this country, if you ban menthol, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to create another underground economy. People are going to be having turf wars. And it's going to, again, create this violence in already devastated communities. It's not going to be sold on Park Avenue. They're going to be sold in communities that are underserved. And, it's unfortunate, but it happens every day. And one of the biggest problems we have is that 48% of the people in the country believe that gun violence is a big problem. We have another 24% that think it's a moderately big problem. We only have 22% of people that think it's a small problem. So why aren't we addressing it more seriously? And I can tell you why. It's because of the politics. You have groups like the NRA out there, politicking. And what made matters worse is the District of Columbia versus Heller case in 2008, where the Supreme Court said that you have a right to carry a weapon. You have a right to bear arms. All right. And, the marketing has changed. If you look at it, and when you see that gun violence go up, there's more marketing around it. You can pick probably out of the top 10 songs, you probably hear at least 2 of them that glorify gun violence. And until we address it from that angle, and where's it resulted? As the special agent Charge said earlier, youth, that's the number one cause of youth deaths is gun violence, and it's the number one cause of death of black men is gun violence. So until we start taking this matter on seriously, there's 20 states right now where you don't even need a permit to get a handgun, but you need a permit to get your driver's license.
Wow.
So one of the good things I can say, and I'll end with this: the Biden-Harris administration currently now is providing money for programming in various different communities that are underserved. But I know it's with good intent, but until we get down to the root causes and the causation as to the reason why, and addressing those issues, it's going to continue to be a problem. I'll stop there.
Agreed. I thank you for that. Some disturbing stuff we're receiving today, but we gotta be down with reality. Reality, as we say in New Jersey, it is what it is. We can't deny it, and that's some realistic stuff that you guys are sharing. And on the action front, I want to introduce my other president of an organization that I've been in proudly for a while, and that is Reginald Johnson. He's the president of the NAACP Metuchen Edison branch here in New Jersey. He does a great job, but I'm not going to toot his horn. I'll let him toot his own horn. But his leadership is phenomenal. He's a former federal agent, and he's currently an agent with the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, through which he investigates bias incidents and hate crimes that occur in Middlesex County. And as I said, he's my president, but without further ado, I want to bring him in. Reginald Johnson, please say hello to everyone, and whatever you have to share with us, we're here to receive.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm glad to be with this distinguished panel. I believe I know almost every one of you, and have worked with you in the past. So I'm honored to be here. I was watching a television program recently on the environment and how it affects volcanoes, and I realized that America, to a degree, is a volcano, with its lava being created by issues like white supremacy. The United States, we look at violence that eliminated most of our indigenous people, violence that sustained an economy of enslaved people, violence at the voting booth, at the lunch counter, violence that left a bloated boy in an open casket, violence that killed a king in Memphis, Tennessee, violence that mass killings in, Charleston, South Carolina, El Paso, Texas, and Pittsburgh. We've been very concerned about the link between the NRA, the link with with lone wolves, and how it affects our community. We've been developing programs. Some of the programs that we have developed, we have now a shoot hoops not gun tournament where we have the fire department against the police department, and we add our teenagers to both teams to play against each other. We have a program called Safe Space, targeting the LGBT community, where if you feel threatened, you can go into a business in your area and feel some source of security. And we've been developing and creating expungement programs so that returnees have an opportunity to turn their life around. And
Can you tell us what that is? Expungement. What does that mean?
Well, it's the removal of negative. If you're coming out of prison or corrections, it's a way of removing negative information from your background. If you complete the expungement, when you fill out an application, you can actually say that you have no prison record. So unless there's exceptions to the rule, whether you're applying for law enforcement or in the medical field, but So we've been kind of active on that end, but
Okay.
and that's really where we are right now. I can tell you this, that we're talking about violence. If you compare it to the amount of bias incidents that come across my desk, I'm well close to 200 violent uh, um, harassment and criminal mischief activities that are targeted to bias crime incidents. And this is double of what I've had over the past few years. And,
Right.
I'm really concerned about where it's going to lead to by the end of the year. Uh, Many of my cases do not involve gun violence. However, it could escalate if not if left unchecked.
Thank you for that. And I don't know. I'm feeling that there needs to be further dialogue on this. You guys getting together at least to flush out some of this stuff because it is a volcano, as you pointed out. This is a volcano. We can't just sit here and watch it erupt. We got to do something, right?
Mm.
So I hope and pray that we'll all be able to get together. Prosecutor Webb McCrae, let me ask you something on something he said. He said that the expungement program, while I personally see how that can contribute to less violence in some of the communities that we all serve, I'd like to get your take on that because I think you have a unique perspective from your seat as the prosecutor of a county here in New Jersey.
So with expungement, I think that we should expand avenues for expungement. What we know is that, well, what I believe is that when people pay their debt to society, they should be able to reintegrate into society and, take advantage of all of the opportunities that the community provides. And we know that when they can't do that, that sometimes they turn back to crime and recidivate. Now, I would say that there are certain crimes that, extremely violent crimes or sex offenses that, should be precluded from expungement, but opening up pathways to expungement generally will help people reintegrate into society, be able to get jobs, support their families. And those things are things that, allow people to not go back to crime.
Excellent. I thank you for that. That chime in is exactly what we need to be thinking about. I want to introduce you to another gentleman now. His name is Glenn Benson. He's a preacher, a counselor, a former member of the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Police Department. He works on reforming police programs right now. I want to tell you a quote from the Attorney General out in Minnesota. You recall the tragic circumstances of George Floyd a couple of years ago, but it was prosecuted under the leadership of the Minnesota Attorney General, Keith Ellison. He said this about our next guest. Reverend Benson is the bridge between the community and the police that is needed. So we want to ask him to build a bridge for the next couple of moments in talking about what he may have thought about and even accomplished with regard to this whole area of gun violence. Reverend Glenn Benson, who's also an author, and we're going to give away a couple of his books today. Go ahead.
Amen. Thank you, Ed. And it's a pleasure to meet all the other panelists. I am a former police officer. I go way back, dating myself to the 90s. The program that I developed, Police Restructuring Transformation Program, was 30 years in the making. I was a police officer during the time of the Rodney King beating. So seeing the subsequent murders of Black men and women throughout the course of years and continuing now, I developed the Police Restructuring Transformation Program in an effort to try and bring the community and the police departments together to come up with a holistic form of police training that would evolve into a police department that will really protect and serve the people, that the community can feel safe with. My perspective on violence, gun violence, is different from what I've been hearing. And I would like to start off with a quote from the chief of staff of President Nixon. His name was John Ehrlichman. And he gives a perspective. This begins a perspective of my take on gun violence in this country. John Ehrlichman stated, and it's you can Google this, his statement says, "Do you want to know what this war on drugs was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war on Blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Therefore, the eruption of gun violence in America could not be going on without the complicit involvement of the government of the United States and its designated law enforcement agencies. Why are there more guns in white suburban areas than there are in urban areas and neighborhoods of color? Yet there is less crime and less gun violence in these white suburban neighborhoods. Why are people arrested and harassed in neighborhoods of color for petty crimes instead of the police going after the violent crime offenders that are the perpetrators of this gun violence? If a grandmother sitting on the porch knows who the violent crime offenders are that are shooting up her neighborhood and killing her neighbors, don't you think the police know? And why are they not arresting them? I would also have to bring in the statistics that show that gun violence had a significant statistical decrease during the protests and the marches that surrounded the issues of police brutality against George Floyd and Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, going all the way back to Rodney King, where the two leading gangs in LA, the Crips and the Bloods, called a truce to end the violence in their communities, to come together to focus on the police violence and brutality that was ravaging our people. And then after the riots subsided, and when the defund the police movement became a protest slogan, there was a precipitous increase in gun violence. Now put yourself in the place of the people who are being defunded. If someone was threatening to take away your job, would you not do everything within your power to see to it that you are now seen as absolutely necessary and non-disposable? Statistics on gun violence in this country show a precipitous increase during the defund the police movement. I'm just stating the facts. What are the conditions that make it so difficult for people to pursue basic human rights in neighborhoods of color, i.e., the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, the right to have access to fair employment with a living wage and decent housing, the right to move freely without harassment because of the color of your skin? These basic rights are stripped away and denied Black people, forcing them to attack each other for whatever crumbs they can get. Yet in white suburban neighborhoods, these rights and liberties are just taken for granted as provided by the Constitution. Therefore, you don't see the same gun violence that is erupting across the country in their neighborhoods. Once again, I'm just asking some questions and stating some facts. Could it be that if the police had criminal ties to the drug trafficking and the illegal behavior that's generating billions of dollars in this country, and we know that they do through COINTELPRO, spelled just the way I said it, COINTELPRO, would it not be in the best interest of those organizations to ensure that nothing disrupts the flow of this drug traffic? And in order to do that, there has to be constant chaos and violence within the communities where drugs proliferate and illegal traffic and criminal activity takes place. I'm just raising a series of questions today and stating some facts. Gun violence cannot exist in this country without the complicit direct involvement of the United States government and its designated law enforcement agencies, i.e., the CIA, the FBI, and the local police department. I repeat, gun violence and the drug trade could not exist without their complicit direct involvement. As I said, my perspective on this problem and this issue is a little different from the rest of the panelists.
Well, we appreciate your input on that, Reverend Benson. Thank you so much. I have Reverend Benson's book here. Let's get it in the camera there. It's called A Race to Remember. We have several free books we're going to be giving away. If you want the free book, write in the comment box, either YouTube or Facebook Live, that you would like a copy of a free autographed book. We will give it to you. You do not have to agree with everything that Reverend Benson or anyone else on this panel says, but I think an open dialogue is very, very important. I think to hear what other perspectives are, no matter how disturbing they may be to our personal sentiments, to learn what they are is of paramount importance. Did anyone else want to chime in on that? Raise your hand, or we're going to move on to our last presenter. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Glenn. We appreciate your input. We're going to get back to you. Let's go to Cynthia Dawkins Harris. Did I say that right, Cynthia? Let me get you off mute. I got that correct. I got you're right, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. Cynthia has been in community work for a long time. I've worked with her on a couple of things, but the main thing is the murder, actually, by gunfire of a member of my church. And we're going to talk about that at the end. I will. I don't know if Cynthia has something to chime in before the end. A member of my church, a young man, was murdered in 2019, and his sentencing was just day before yesterday, right?
Right.
And the sentencing of the murderer. And justice prevailed. Justice worked in this particular case. And I want to talk to you about Cynthia. Her background includes the fact that she's the president of the National Action Network, the Newark chapter, and she's also a soon-to-be member of the NAACP Metuchen Edison branch, which is my branch, and you can see President Reggie Johnson smiling. We're very happy about that. We know we're getting a strong resource in her. But anyway, Cynthia, why don't you tell us what your perspective is, and then we're going to go. She has a slide prepared that I'm going to throw up on the screen. There we are.
Okay. Okay. My name is Cynthia Dawkins Harris. I am honored. First of all, thanks for having me on this panel. I am honored to be on a panel with you guys. You all are awesome. So what I did when the Reverend asked me to be on the panel, I just put some slides together. I did some information, looked for some information to talk about this topic, the eruption of gun violence in America. How do I get to the next? Okay, 4 things that causes more gun violence is the surge in guns, the gun sales, the record gun sales. We have more illegal guns on our streets than any other country. Just like it was said earlier, more guns than people. The social unrest after the murder of George Floyd. And lastly, the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic, people losing their jobs, lack of leads that led to homelessness and hunger, and the increase in gun violence that caused the increase in gun violence. Americans own more guns than any other country in the world. America has more gun violence and gun-related deaths than any other places in the world. Studies have shown that guns in your home does not increase stopping a robber, it has been, the study showed that the increase in gun violence with the guns in your home mostly is done by shooting someone in that home, one of your loved ones being shot by their own guns, and sometimes by suicide. So those people with these guns in their homes, they're taking them and committing suicide with them. Magazine capacity limits. Any magazine that holds more than 10 rounds for any type of firearm should be illegal. Red flag laws will keep guns out of the hands of many people that may present a danger to others or themselves, like it was said earlier. With the red flag laws, you can kind of, if someone sees someone know that they have a gun, they can kind of report that. So the NRA made sure that there's loopholes to these laws. Ghost guns is something new. You order parts, there's no way to trace, there's no permits, there's no waiting period. All you need is a 3D printer. You can put together your own gun. Open carry, that was mentioned earlier as well, where gun owners openly carry firearms while they go about their daily business, has seen an increase in the United States.
I'm sorry about that.
4 things that causes more gun violence. It's very easy to buy a gun in America. In the summer, crime always goes up. Some states, you don't need a permit to buy a gun. There is no safety training to own a gun, no background checks at gun shows. There are more guns than people in the United States, that was mentioned earlier, and no red flag laws on the federal level, no waiting periods. The NRA is at fault and should be held responsible, in my personal opinion, for every mass shooting. The NRA is an advocacy organization centered on the Second Amendment right, the right to bear arms. They believe that heavily, more so to get gun sales up. The NRA spend $2 to $5 million a year on lobbying for gun rights. In 2020, the NRA spent $29 million on political campaigns. This is a conflict of interest. They dump money into our politicians' campaign, and they dictate the laws to our politicians. 400 million guns in the United States during the presidency of Donald Trump. Hate crimes increased, in part due to his language. Why would anyone need an AR-15 Armalite rifle? This gun can kill hundreds of people a minute. Mass shootings with this is a gun of choice. When you're doing a mass shooting, in other words, the AR-15 is the gun of choice. Gun violence. Black men usually die by homicide. White men usually die by suicide. Women usually die by domestic violence. Children by mass shooting of mentally ill. The NRA poses to aim teachers, daycare workers, and churches with rifles, AR-15s, or guns, period. This will increase gun sales. This is why they put it into play. Cause more accidental deaths, increase chaos, increase pain for parents, teachers, and their families, increase mass shootings. Increase in mental illness, the pandemic, the loss of human life, heartbreak, job loss, evictions, food insecurities, depression, lack of health insurance, long-term health issues after contracting the pandemic, a sense of hopelessness. Funding for the mentally ill has been cut. An increase in policing in Black, brown communities. The NRA Congress should stop the mass shooting if they wanted. They could stop the mass shootings if they want to, but the NRA couldn't make billions off of Congress stopping mass shootings, and gun sales would go down. Mass shooters want to be famous. The copycat shootings, the need to be seen and heard, mental illness, the media elevate the names and images of shooters, making them feel famous, important, and the media should show the images of the victims and the first responders and the heroes. No notoriety. It was said on news that the only thing that Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump agree on is the notoriety or the celebritizing the shooting and the shooters is what make other copycats do the same thing. Gun violence hit poor areas disproportionately higher. Gun violence, COVID shut down courts, police alienated from the community, budgets cuts from programs in poor areas for community programs to keep children off the street, such as mentoring programs. We don't need more police. We need more programs for the youth. Police must build trust in our communities. I always say the police should look like the people that reside in these communities. Bring resources to communities, and to have wraparound service is key. The NRA is a $63.5 billion industry.
Wow.
Because of that, like was said earlier, they dictate the pace. It causes putting the guns out, causes mass shootings, mental illness, gang violence, notoriety, and suicide. That's all. I just wanted to share what I have doing a little research and coming up with the things that I've read about and in the news, listening to, and finding out different things. And I have also put together, like the Rev said, I'm with the National Action Network. I started another organization, Journey to Justice, so that I can branch out and do some other things. I met up with some people who from different organizations, Journey to Justice, and that's one of the things that's at the top of the list: gun violence.
Very good. I'm so glad to hear that that's at the top of the list, because this is a pressing problem for the country. And statistically speaking, we're talking a lot about Black folks, brown folks, and the like. Statistically, Black people are 10 times more likely to be victimized by gun violence than their white counterparts. So this is important. This is a real statistic that cannot be denied. But I have a question coming from Dr. Stacy Lloyd. By the way, KWBE is donating 5 books written by Reverend Benson to 5 folks who chimed in on this. He's going to autograph them for you. We're going to get those books out to you guys. Dr. Lloyd is one of them, and Dr. Lloyd has a question. I'm reading it. It says, what race, and anyone can answer this, what race has access to the most guns, and who is involved in most of the shootings? Many of you are on mute, so if you want to answer that, just put your finger up or something, and I'll unmute you. President.
Yeah, I'm sure the ATF have better statistics on this, but a lot of the guns that are trafficked into various different underserved communities are trafficked by organized crime groups, the Hells Angels, white supremacist groups, and things like that. Obviously, they're not manufactured there. So I think the first thing we have to do is get down to where the root of it, where are all these guns coming from, and why is there such a proliferation in certain communities? In addition to the social economic issues that lead to crime and its causation. In addition to that, you know, somebody's trafficking these guns into the community. And we also have to examine too, is there, Brother Benson had mentioned earlier, is there depolicing going on to also help proliferate all of these shootings in various different communities? And until it impacts your community per se, people usually don't get that involved and they don't push back as much, you know. And I appreciate the media's coverage with all these mass shootings now, because that in a way is going to help us get the questions on the table and push the envelope forward.
Excellent.
Brother Giles,
I
want to say that I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I have to say that having seen what happened in Uvalde and remembering how I felt after the Newtown shooting, and seeing that our legislators on the federal level and mostly on the federal level, because New Jersey is very progressive in this area, it really left me feeling disheartened. You know, if we can witness 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds being mowed down in, you know, mass shootings, and that doesn't wake the country up to do something to say enough is enough, I feel like hopeless about the moral conscience of Congress and our legislators to make a difference.
Thank you for that, prosecutor. Karen Cantor, you wanted to chime in on this issue. Hold on.
First of all, I'm learning so much from everybody. But one of the things that's so important to understand is that 5% of the gun dealers are responsible for all these crime guns.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that
that's right.
I'm really hopeful that the ATF, now that it does have a permanent director, will be able to identify who those gun dealers are and to be more rigorous in giving them fines or closing them down, because that has not happened. And that is certainly a problem. The other thing is, at least in New Jersey, 80% of our guns are from out of state. So this
Down
is
south.
a federal problem. This is not a New Jersey problem or blah, blah, blah. This is a national problem because we don't have gun shows and you can just buy guns. I mean, people come from many different parts of the world to buy in the United States because it is so easy to purchase a gun. I would also like to clarify something that people have been talking about, and that's the issue of mental illness. You know, mental illness is such a complicated issue, and yes, we don't do a good enough job addressing mental illness. But you know, we're starting to do research which had not been funded for so many years because of bills that had prevented this from happening. So they're finding that it's not really people who have been diagnosed mentally ill. It is people who have had some life-altering event that has triggered this, and that on an impulse, they have done these things. Just like suicide is an impulse, these issues have often been impulse. That's not all of it, but I just want to say people often get scared by people who are mentally ill, and the mentally ill are usually the targets and not the perpetrators of these issues. And just to say about the NRA, you know, and about our Congress, I feel totally the same as other people have said about why isn't Congress doing more? Well, you know, they fund these candidates to be on board with what they say. And absolutely, gun violence is now an issue for all candidates. And people really, and that's why I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters, because people have to vote and get in people who are gun safety candidates, right? Because the other ones are getting A's from the NRA. And I know my congressman, Frank Pallone, was very proud of the grade that he got from the NRA, which was an F. So, you know, you want to make sure that your candidate has a bad grade from the NRA.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Sec Matthews, did you want to chime in on this at all?
Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry. I've been kind of losing connection and getting back in. So
We're good. We hear you fine.
I'd like to touch on. First off, Reverend Benson, if at any time, I would love to take some time and sit down and have a cup of coffee with you. I really would like to. I would enjoy that very much if you have some time in your schedule to make for me after this. But so to address several of the issues, I'll try to take them in order. First, Commissioner, so to your point, going back to the normalization of guns in our culture. I think I'm just going way back to your introduction. I agree 100% with you. You had talked about the reference to these firearms in rap music. I would say it's proliferated through all aspects of everyone's life. So, for instance, I would challenge anyone tonight to get onto Netflix, get onto any kind of movie subscription, scroll through those movies. Look to see how many of those movies have a gun depicted on the picture advertised.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. One movie that kills me that I even back then, like a Lethal Weapon 4 with Chris Rock. Chris Rock was waving this gun around, making his point, pointing it at his friends as a joke with his badge. I think that the media has done such a horrible job portraying this as it's normal. People don't understand the ramifications, the real life effects of utilizing a gun, for criminal purposes and the injuries that they can sustain. Again, I've had to deal with several of our agents' deaths, and with the aftermath of that, I've had to deal with other suspects that have been shot with their families. It's terrible. I've dealt with it on both sides, but I believe that normalcy is a huge contributor to the proliferation of these guns and the use of them on our streets. And it's not just my opinion. There's a fantastic book by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. It's called On Killing, and it's a book.
What is it again?
On Killing. It's
On
called
Killing.
On Killing, and it's more of the psychology behind how we've gotten our soldiers to fight. And I think most humans have a general aversion to killing. I truly do. And I think, when I look at the crime gun intelligence we look at every day, and, those of you involved in law enforcement will agree with me that it's a relatively small percentage of the population that is responsible for an overwhelmingly majority of the firearms violence in our communities. So one of the things, and Reverend Benson, this gets to your point, that ATF does, we have two main functions with our criminal enforcement for firearms violations that we utilize. One is our National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, and then the next is E-Trace. So the NIBIN, the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, what we do is we take ballistics information recovered from multiple crime scenes, and they're analyzed, and hopefully it provides us links. So then what I've done to my field division, all of the agents that work for me, we have to have 100% of our investigations supported by what I call crime gun intelligence. That means if you are targeting someone for a violation of Federal Firearms Act or a violation, you have to tell me why. Tell me how they're a driver of violence. How do you know? So this results in strategic, fair, and impartial policing, rather than throwing a very wide net in the community and hoping we catch something. But now we look at those ballistic matches. We look at our E-Trace data, which is the gun recovery data, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But we see then if there is a person that he was recovered, a gun was recovered from him, and that gun was utilized in 3 shootings over the past year and a half. It is reasonable for the police to assume that although he might not be responsible for those acts, he has acquired this gun from someone that might have been involved, and that's what we start our investigation. So, and all of our investigations, at least while I'm here in the ATF field division, they're focused on NIBIN and then our trace data. So our trace data, if those two systems, think of the trace data as a way of that tells us where a gun was born, where it entered into the public, where it died, which is where it was recovered by law enforcement. And NIBIN tells us how that gun lived its life. So by NIBIN, we can hopefully link, if it comes back to a match, we can link it to other crime scenes. And again, then we can compare, look for commonalities across crime scenes. And I will tell you, New Jersey is by far the gold standard in this country. By the AG directive, I believe it was in 2018, all police agencies in the state of New Jersey have to
Mm-hmm.
I think we lost
I'd
you.
like to make a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Jeff, I look forward to us networking. I would really love that. I'd love to network with all the panel. I just wanted to make a tag onto Prosecutor Webb McCrae's comment about the Uvalde shooting. In the book, A Race to Remember, which documents how we all came together to change the course of history and have a Black president elected for the first time in this country, we need to follow through. And in the book, I talk about the fact that it's not just enough to get out the vote. You have to then make people accountable to hold these offices. I don't care if they ran for dog catcher. From the federal level, state level, local level. I talk about the necessity, as Ms. Cantor, I think your name is,
Yes,
said, to do a report card on our elected officials. And anybody who gets a grade less than an A- means that they are minus a job. We can do this, and we can cultivate a candidate within our own communities who will be accountable to the people so that they know if they don't do what they're supposed to do when they get in office, they're gone too. We need to start to use the power of our vote in a very, how can I say, purposeful way, as opposed to just saying, get out the vote, and then you vote them in, and then nothing takes place. This is a voting year. We need to hold our elected officials accountable to what they promised they were going to do.
That's right.
That's what I want to say.
Amen. Let's go to Cynthia Dawkins, and then we'll go to you, prosecutor.
Yes. So we talked about the violence in the music through rap. We talked about violence that shows on our movies. What about the violence through the video games that we buy our children and our grandchildren?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Freedom's not free. Somebody said that earlier.
Right.
I
Thank you for
want to. I know that Ed got kicked out again, or Jeffrey got kicked out again, but we do use NIBIN in a very useful way to be able to trace firearms that are used in crimes throughout our community. And it's quite astonishing when we get the NIBIN hits, how many times those guns have been used in shootings where we picked up, what do you call it, the casings, and murders. And I want to kind of comment on Reverend Benson's point about focusing on these challenged communities, which tend to be Black and Brown. And I think it's necessary to do that. But what we need our federal partners to help us do is to focus on the gun dealers, on the straw purchasers, and on the ghost gun proliferators. So as much as with as much zest as we work on the local issues, which prosecutors like myself can do because we're jurisdictional within our counties, we need our federal partners and the political will, up in down in DC, to focus as much attention on the big gun dealers and and taking away licenses from folks who are selling these guns that are then making their way into our communities. And I often talk about racial justice and the fact that it is right and just to shine the light on on law enforcement, and we have much work to do. But we have to also talk about systemic racism, the things that contribute to that, that make communities challenged and also promote crime, right? And, oftentimes when we want to shut down gun dealers, we're not doing that. It's harder to do. I understand that. But we got to do that with the same zest that we're prosecuting the gun crime that is happening in communities.
Exactly.
And that's not a criticism of the ATF. That's really a criticism of government. But, we're dealing with big money. We're oftentimes not dealing with people of color. And oftentimes in more affluent communities, things happen that don't happen, or the same things are happening there, but they're not policed in the same way as they're policed in Black and Brown communities. Now, saying that, being a person of color, being a person that loves my community, we also have to talk about personal responsibility within our communities to not participate in this type of activity, and also talk about fighting against that no snitching culture, which allows evil to flourish and allows a few to create a great deal of havoc in
Right.
already challenged communities.
Yes. Thank you so much for that input. Zach Matthews, I want to get back to you. But first, I want to say this. We got to cut off the free books. We're up to 7 now. So if you want a copy of the book now, we're going to give away the 7 where they're going to be autographed by Reverend Benson. But the book is available on Amazon. It's called A Race to Remember by Glenn N. Benson. I'm going to post it on the ticker tape below there shortly. As you can see, I posted the book recommended by Zach Matthews on killing. I'm going to definitely get a copy of that. I want to see, as
Well,
I encourage you to do, see what the other perspective is.
well,
Uh,
and that book really just I'll try to I apologize.
No, go ahead,
for
please.
so much, but for that book, it simply adds credibility to the conversation we've had about the desensitization of our country in terms of firearms violence, where it's kind of become more normalcy. So back in World War II, the U.S. military realized that it was an issue, so they went from a bullseye target to shooting at a human silhouette. And that simple change, they found greatly affected the lethality of our soldiers. So that's, if you envision, like, that's simply a silhouette of a human, how that changed the lethality. Then when you put it into today's perspective, as you know, where we're bombarded through it by 24/7 media outlets that are heavily partisan based. We're looking at it, you know, through the video games, through the rap culture, through all aspects of media. So from that, I wanted to finish that thought. But to Prosecutor Webb's point, so in terms of the federal assistance we can give you, realize that the firearm crime or the firearm violence problem, it looks different in different parts of the country. The crime in Chicago is a little bit different from in rural South Carolina. And knowing that too, as a federal agency, you know, we are affected by the federal government, and our laws are made by a combination of legislatures, both left and right. So therefore, you know, we can only enforce the laws that are on the books. So, and to kind of paint a little perspective, when I was working in another part of the country, it was a little bit more gun friendly. I had done a case on a firearms federal licensee. We had seized over 500 guns, had multiple undercover wiretaps and recordings, clearly showing that these guns were going to certain communities and to people that couldn't possess them. And at the time of his sentencing, the judge said, "You, sir, are a victim of our nation's overzealous gun crimes," and gave him 12 months probation. So that is one of the problems. Now, I will say, I believe that the federal government and our Congress is moving in the right direction with the recent passing of that bipartisan Safer Communities Act. For the first time since the passage of the Gun Control Act in 1968, we now have a true firearms trafficking statute, and we now have a true firearms straw purchaser statute. And that's great for us. The problem is that on the back end of that is that the sentences. Are those sentences commensurate with the crime? I personally feel that there's not a huge deterrent effect there, because most firearms traffickers and straw purchasers have minimal to no criminal history, which enables them to be a trafficker or purchaser of firearms. Therefore, under the federal sentencing guidelines, they are very, very low. Sometimes we get more bang for our buck in New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey. I got to tell you, your state firearms laws are very progressive and very tough. And we've taken several of our investigations on the state side because that created a better result for the community. But with that, though, so getting back to it, so that's one of the challenges we face, is that, you know, knowing that, you know, we can only enforce those laws that are on the books, and then establishing venue. Many of these straw purchasing acts actually occur in other areas that are a little more gun friendly. So then we don't have the ability to take those cases because those substantive acts actually occurred in what I would call a source state, where it's more easy to acquire firearms, rather than New Jersey, which, because of the heavy state regulations, is I would call a market state, which makes it prime for trafficking into the state. So, you know, that's one of the issues that we wrestle with here. But then, Commissioner Shipp, to your part, like, what does trafficking look like? So every day, every firearms is traced in the state of New Jersey. And again, I'm only going to talk about my division, which is the state of New Jersey. So we have it set up where our Crime Gun Intelligence Center, there's a little over 4,000 guns that are recovered and traced in the state of New Jersey every year. We look at every single trace. We look at those traces, then we're looking for indicators of possible trafficking activity, like a short time to crime, multiple sales. So if someone purchased a gun that was, if this gun was recovered and we saw that it was purchased in, say, some other state, several weeks ago, that's a strong clue for us that, something nefarious may have happened here, or and we begin our investigation. And there's other indicators we look at as well. There's not, in my experience, I don't see there's very, very, very infrequently is there a big organized crime syndicate organizing these trafficking schemes. Normally it's smaller groups, 3 or 4 folks. Generally they have ties to some of the communities that these guns are destined for, and then they have friends or associates in other areas. Now with the gun shows, I'll tell you, New Jersey, again, when I worked in other states, they would allow gun shows, and there were different, I got to figure out a way to say this, be politically correct. There's issues that come along some of the gun shows with regulating and people, whether they're doing the right thing or wrong thing. Most people are doing the right thing, but since New Jersey doesn't have them, it's a little bit easier for us. So that kind of closes one whole side of our trafficking investigations that we would normally look at. Yes, Ms. Harris.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I wanted you to finish, but I just had a comment to make.
Yes.
A comment that Jennifer Webb McCrae, a term that she used earlier about the straw buyer.
Yes.
And that's the way that someone who was flagged, it's a loophole, someone that was flagged earlier that can't buy a gun because of mental disorders, or he might have had problems with domestic violence. He can't buy a gun now, so he gets someone that could buy it, and they give it to him.
Let me interject real quick. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. But Matthews, if you would tell us what a straw buyer is, I've heard that term several times. I know what it is, but I think for our audience, and we got a lot of comments, I want to get to a couple of those at least. So go ahead on that.
So basically, if there's a person that's prohibited by law of legally possessing a firearm, say, for instance, like anyone under federal law, there are 9 different categories, but just the most common is anyone that's been convicted of a crime punishable by a term of imprisonment for over a year, which would make him a felon. They lose their right to bear firearms without having some sort of expungement. So therefore, if that person wants a firearm, they will usually enlist the help of another person who can legally purchase it and have them buy it on their behalf and transfer it to them. So but
that's
when you
straw buyer.
Yes, it is.
So I think somebody else had a comment or a question. Okay, I want to get to some of the comments from our viewing audience. A lot of thanks being sent out. Trudy Moore, who was actually a editor for Jet Magazine for a number of years, and she was interviewed on our program a few months back. Fascinating interview. You should check that out. But here's her comment. She said, we could talk about the politicians, the police, but I agree with Prosecutor Webb McCrae that we have to have every household and parent take personal responsibility to stem this tide. And Ms. Moore also went on to say that she's listening from the south side of Chicago. One of you mentioned Chicago. She said, it's a shame to say this, but people have to understand that none of us is safe from gun violence until we all are. I'm so tired of hearing people in suburban areas, she continues, say that, quote, nothing like this ever happens here. This is not an issue regarding, quote, those people, unquote, but rather an issue that impacts all of us. Thank you for that. And Ronald Robinson says, Zach Matthews points out some excellent issues to think about, and that he sees the responsibility in part coming from social media as well as video games and songs, as Commissioner Shipp pointed out. And finally, from Virginia, there are other comments, but these, I apologize for those I couldn't get to. From Virginia, Nyla Harris says, I agree, video games are virtual reality, literally. We need to check out what our children are playing and determine if it becomes a reality for them. I mean, that's real talk. Karen, I want to let you finish off because we're gonna close off very shortly. Go ahead.
Okay, just very quickly, I want people, particularly in New Jersey, to know about a recent decision by the Supreme Court of the United States. In New Jersey, we have always been required, if you want to carry a gun outside of your home, you had to go before a judge and show that there was a very serious threat, which required you to carry a gun on you, right? So we had a high threshold for if you wanted to be able to carry a gun outside of your home.
Wow.
But that decision, which was the day before the Roe v. Wade decision, that decision, on the Bruin, called the Bruin case, has now made it so that we don't have that ability to require that anymore. And so that more and more people are going to be carrying a gun, a concealed gun. And when I was in Texas, in a Texas store, and I just, was talking to people, they said the smart people don't open carry their gun. They keep it concealed. So it's just important for people to know that things are changing in our state. They're hoping to provide a lot of restrictions, of sensitive places where you won't be allowed to. But it's important for people to understand that the atmosphere may become a little bit more volatile.
Yeah.
That is very important. Thank you for that. Wow. Zach Matthews, I'm going to give you like 2 minutes to close us off because we got to get to some other business. And I think we just lost Zach Matthews. Did we lose him? He'll be back.
Mr.
So,
Speed, can I, in reference to the comment,
please.
one thing I want to talk about is like empowering parents. We do, every June is Gun Safety and Violence Month in Cumberland County. We're the first county to designate that month as Gun Safety and Violence Month. And one of the things that we talk about is twofold: empowering children to understand that if they encounter a gun, to stay away from it, move away, and not touch it, move away and tell a responsible adult. 2, empowering parents to ask the hard questions. If you send your kid over to someone's house, you should be asking them, do you have firearms in your home and do you safely store them? We do a healthy corner store initiative where our chaplains go out and talk about how adults who have firearms have a responsibility to safely store them. So, knowledge is key, and we need to be empowering our community members to ask those hard questions and teaching our young people about the dangers of firearms and to absolutely stay away from them and tell a responsible adult.
Excellent. Prosecutor, if you don't mind, I would like you to send me those 4 items. We want to get them out to folks.
We have a brochure, so I can do that.
Appreciate that very much. Well, I want to get to this. We have like 5 minutes left. First of all, thank you, this esteemed panel, as many of you have already said. Thank you for showing up here, helping us, being used to bless us, to give us this absolutely necessary, mandatory information. You guys have really knocked this out of the park, and we very much appreciate it. We're blessed by you. We're indebted to you. And we are definitely, for those who are able and willing, we definitely want to get together again because the gun violence scenario, particularly with mass shootings, has not ended. I want to share with you a letter that was written by the mom, and I'm only going to share highlights of the letter, written by the mom of the young man. His name is Terrence Kalange, who was killed in 2019. He was a member of my church. And the sentencing of the murderer, Ryan Keogh, was last Friday, day before yesterday. And Terrence was killed on January 9th, 2019 by Ryan. It was a terrible situation. It hurt many of us to the core. But justice was served in this matter. And this is from Lisa Myrick, who's Terrence's mom. It's been 3.5 years to get to this point. Somerset County Judge Peter Tober sentenced Ryan Keogh to 53 years for 10 of 11 charges of guilty. 30 years without parole, giving him and his parents a long time to think about the tragedy of that day. I will never forget January 9th, 2019. She mentions his parents because after Ryan shot Terrence, he called his parents, and Terrence lay bleeding to death on the porch of their home for almost 2 hours before 911 was called. And
Right.
Cynthia Dawkins Harris participated in ensuring that justice was served in this. And she's mentioned in this letter, as you'll see. But his mom goes on to say, life is precious, and they didn't value the life of my son Terrence until their lives were affected by their actions, which gives credence to the whole idea we've been expressing here today, that it has to affect us oftentimes for us to take action. Sadly, to this day, the parents and Ryan express no remorse or responsibilities for their actions. Even one of the men on the cross with Jesus recognized that his soul needed redemption and forgiveness. I believe, Lisa says, in the power of forgiveness, but I'm also mindful that there are consequences to your actions on this earth. I realize that in all things, the battle is not yours, it is God. Throughout the process of pursuing justice for my son Terrence, I let God order my steps, and he brought the right people to surround me, to cover and pray for me and my family as we pursued justice for Terrence. I called them the Justice League. Cynthia Dawkins from the NAACP, from the National Action Network, is one of many family members and friends, too many to name all now. But God selected them, and he selected the right team of prosecutors to bring truth to the light. I give all glory, honor, and praise to the Most High who saw my need. I had to become like a child so that I could be led. The Holy Spirit has given and continues to give me the strength to press forth and live in God's highest purpose. My sons, plural, because one of her sons died of what she calls a broken heart 6 months later. My sons did not die in vain, with the purpose to build a legacy against gun violence and to spread love, hope, and joy to the world. We all have a gift and a God-given purpose in which we should walk. So let us go forward and give God all the glory. Love, hope, and charity from Lisa Myrick. We know that you all on this panel today have walked in your gift. We thank you for sharing your gift with us. I have, as Reverend Benson said, a different perspective from others. My perspective is that of a minister, which is ultimately, this is, while a gun problem is a spiritual problem, I think we need to do things to return to, good and decent behavior, and some of the things that tend to serve as parameters to stop us from going over the line with video games and songs and the whole culture, as has been pointed out. I think we need to look to the one who's established us still as the greatest country on earth. We need to look to that God for our redemption. I can't wait till we do this again. This has been phenomenal. God bless you all. We got 7 books to give out, Reverend Benson. So, yes. And anybody else that is involved in this campaign, we got some. I know we have at least one other publication that's going to be coming out next time. We want to support you. That's what we do here at KWPE, Kicking It with Brother Ed. Like us, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then, God bless you all. We're going to do our thing in getting us out, and we will see you next time. Until then.